Welcome back to the C.T.W. podcast. I'm your host, Aronquez Wynn, and I thank you guys for tuning in again. In this video, I'll start this video by asking a question. And the question is, have you ever been so frustrated with yourself that you just can't seem to figure out why you're doing the things that you're doing? Have you ever been in a place to where maybe you've been with your husband or wife, or maybe you've been with your partner to where they have frustrated you to the point where you can't think straight? Have you just been in a situation that has caused you extreme frustration to the point where you become angry and you start to get furious and you start to it now sparks other things like anxiety and depression? Have you ever been frustrated to the point where you just don't know why? In this video, I want to possibly give you a perspective to help you when you become frustrated and to get you to understand how frustration can be your friend. So continue to watch and stay tuned. Frustration is something that all of us experience, whether it's at work, whether it's driving home from work, whether it's maybe we didn't hit a specific goal, maybe it's in marriage or relationships, maybe it's in your finances, maybe it's with your health. Frustration is something that all of us has experienced at some point of our life, in our lives. And the thing about frustration is, depending on your perspective of it, is going to depend on how your body, how your nervous system, how your mind responds to frustration. And so in this video, I'm going to give you perspectives on how frustration can be your friend and how frustration is an indication of how things may need to be changed, how things may need to be adjusted, and how there needs to be that frustration is feedback. And so the first thing that I have here is frustration is an indication that you may need an elevation in a particular area of your life. So the area of your life that frustration that you may be experiencing in a particular area of your life, it can be an indication there needs to be an elevation. And so there may need to be an elevation spiritually, there may need to be an elevation mentally, there may need to be an elevation physically, there may need to be an elevation relationally. And this is the one that I think will help, is that there may need to be a elevation in your perspective. And so when it comes to being frustrated, frustration is something that is a secondary emotion, but I'll get into that later. And so in those areas and there are multiple areas that you can become frustrated in, but those are just the areas that I have written down here. And so when it comes to you being frustrated spiritually, you may not be growing to the rate that you want to be growing. You may not be growing at the rate you want to be growing at. You may not understand the Bible, or you may not understand your relationship with God, or you may not understand God's love. You may not understand certain things that you feel like you should be understanding at the certain season of your life. You may be frustrated that you haven't grown mentally. Maybe you have enough self-awareness to understand, like, okay, why don't I understand? Why do I still have the same perspective as I did when I was younger? Why am I still dealing with X, Y, and Z? Why am I still having the mentality? Why can't I grow? Why can't I achieve? Why can't I do certain things? You may have frustration physically. You've been tackling the same fitness goal for the last 2 years and you just can't seem to get over the hump. It's like you start out so well for the first 2 weeks, and then next thing you know, you start to plateau, and then you start to revert back to old habits. You might be frustrated relationally. You might be continually asking yourself, why don't relationships work that I get in? Why do I continue to pick the same people? Why do I have to deal with this every time I get in a relationship? Okay, why am I like this when I'm in a relationship? And so you could be frustrated relationally. You also can be frustrated prospectively. And so this is the one that I want to deal heavy with, is because understanding that we all have different experiences. All of us grew up in different eras, different times, we're different ages. And so when it comes to a specific perspective, you being frustrated is going to entirely depend on your experience with life. And so sometimes when you're dealing with people, when you're dealing with jobs, when you're in relationships, your perspective is not the only perspective that you're going to be dealing with when you're in those situations. And so sometimes you can become so frustrated to the point that it causes you immense anger, it causes you immense fear or anxiety, or it causes you immense neglect in certain areas, because your perspective of a certain thing should be a certain way. And now that you're dealing with other people's places and things, that perspective now is not being accomplished. And so it causes frustration. And that frustration could be a result of you lashing out. It could be you being reactive instead of you being proactive and understanding who you are. And so when it comes to being frustrated about certain things, about how things should go, your frustration is entirely dependent on your perspective. Your frustration when it comes to perspective, it could be a thing of maybe you need to elevate how you perceive certain things. Maybe there needs to be an understanding that how you grew up is not the only way and not how everyone else grew up. And so you're becoming frustrated in how you perceive life is not how everybody else perceives life. How you may treat people may not be how other people treat people. And so you're being frustrated because your perspective of life, your perspective of how you treat people, your perspective of how you grew up is different. And because it is different, you're expecting other people's perspective and other people's character, morals, values, and ethics to be like yours, in which it causes a lot of frustration to you. And then you now start to place up barriers and walls because you feel as if though now you can't trust people because your perspective is just, at this point of your life, your perspective is just one that is just limited. And so the second point that I have here is frustration can be an indication that you no longer belong on the level that you're on. And so it's similar to elevation, but there's a thing that you no longer belong on this level. It could be a thing of basically abandoning your old way of thinking about a specific thing. It's basically putting on a new way of thinking, but also understanding that a new way of thinking comes and making sure that the new way of thinking comes from the right place. And so I have a verse here, Colossians 3:10, and this is the Amplified version. And it says, "And you have put on the new spiritual self, who is being continually renewed in true knowledge, an image of him who created the new self." So it's talking about Christ. And so understanding that frustration can be an indication that you no longer belong on the level that you're on. And so you've tried it your way multiple times. You've tried to go to this person, that person. You tried this business, that business. You tried it your way, this way. And so now understanding that your frustration can be an indication that your way will not work, that you need to broaden your perspective and broaden your way of thinking. And you need to let go of your old way of thinking so that you will be able to obtain a new way of thinking. And so most of the time when you're frustrated about specific things, your frustration can be an indication of you need to either shift up, you need to either shift out of something, up from something, out of something, or you need to shift away from something. And so sometimes it's not necessarily an elevation. Sometimes you're somewhere that you just need to get away from. Sometimes you're somewhere that you just need to get out from, like you can stay how it is or it can stay how it is, but you just need to get out and experience something different to be able to give you a new way of thinking. Maybe you need to hire a coach. Maybe you need to hire a trainer. Maybe you need to hire a financial advisor. Maybe you need to hire someone, a therapist, a counselor, so that you will be able to get out from your perspective and out from your old way of thinking. And so the third point I have here is frustration is feedback. The thing that you once were okay with in one season of your life, you're no longer okay with in this season of your life. And so this is one that I think a lot of people deal with, and sometimes we deal with all of them, but sometimes understanding that your frustration is just feedback to get you to understand that where you are currently in your life no longer satisfies you for what you used to do, or where you are currently, or what you used to do no longer satisfies you for where you are. And so sometimes we can have internal frustration, and that internal frustration can be feedback to allow us to understand that, okay, I need to make some adjustments. I can no longer deal with certain people that I used to deal with. I can no longer date certain people that I used to date. I can no longer treat I can no longer be treated this way by certain people. I can no longer allow my standards, my morals, my values, and my ethics to be not taken seriously. I can no longer allow myself to put up with certain things. I can no longer allow myself to allow my finances to drop below a certain amount of money. Sometimes your frustration is feedback that what once worked in a previous season will not work in this season that you're in. And I think this is one that can catch you off guard, because there are certain seasons and certain times in your life where we adjust, and sometimes we don't even know we adjusted. We've made adjustments mentally and physically because sometimes they come so fast that we don't even know that we've adjusted, and we're trying to figure out why we're so aggravated maybe with our partner, why we're so aggravated in the marriage, why we're so aggravated when it comes to our money or our job, or when it comes to our health. And it's like, okay, I'm aggravated, but what's the reason for my aggravation? What's the reason for my frustration? And sometimes that frustration is something called holy discontent. It's not all that. It's not always that, but sometimes it's God giving you a little nudge to get you to understand that, hey, where you are, you no longer belong here. And if I do not give you some frustration or agitation, which will give you feedback to move forward, then what will end up happening is that you'll stay here and waste the new wine instead of allowing the new wine to produce and allow it to build more wine. And so if you need that story, that's Luke 5, 35 through 37. So most of the time, we have to understand that that frustration is feedback. And one of the points I have here is that it's okay. You shouldn't stay the same your whole life. You have a right to change and adjust, grow and mature, and want better for yourself. And so there are certain situations and certain times where you'll be adjusting so fast, and you'll be adjusting to a point where you're maturing and growing, that some people will try to hold you back from being able to adjust and go forward. Some people will get aggravated with you at the rate that you're adjusting, at the rate that you're maturing, at the rate that you're growing. And it's okay. And sometimes you yourself may feel bad because you've been on this level for so long and it's become so comfortable to you that you feel bad for leaving your loved ones. You feel bad for leaving that old version of yourself. You feel bad and uncertain for not understanding, like, why am I growing? Why am I developing? Why am I going through this phase? Because a lot of times we don't talk about, everybody wants growth and everybody wants achievement and everybody wants success, but we never talk about the backside of what comes with growth, achievement, success, is that now you have to deal with the burden of what once was that no longer is. And so that's the fourth point, is that frustration is feedback. The fourth one is frustration is a secondary emotion. And this is something that I said earlier in the podcast, is that frustration is a secondary emotion. And this is something that most people don't realize, is that when you become angry, when you're frustrated, when you're fearful, when you're anxious, those emotions are secondary emotions. They're not primary emotions. So when it comes to frustration, one of the things that may proceed or come before frustration, it could be neglect. It could be insignificance. It could be you don't feel like someone cares about you, misunderstood. It could be maybe you have a lot of pressure on you, so maybe you just don't understand. People just don't understand what you're going through. And so then that results in you feeling frustrated. It results in the secondary emotion of frustration. When it comes to fear, fear is a secondary emotion. And so understanding that most people have to understand, or fear is a primary emotion, but what comes after fear is a secondary emotion. So fear might precede anxiety. It might precede insecurity. It might precede panic. It might precede inferiority. So understanding secondary emotions and primary emotions, but I have it here. A secondary emotion is usually a more intense emotion that you feel after the primary emotion that causes you to either retreat, react, or do both. And so when it comes to an example of this I wrote down is here. It says, if you're angry, anger is a secondary emotion. Depression, fear, embarrassment, along with other primary emotions, are the reason that your anger was sparked, which causes you to either be proactive, reactive, defensive in that moment. And so understanding that the difference between primary emotions and secondary emotions is that your primary emotion is what comes up first, and then it causes your secondary emotion. It causes you to choose a secondary emotion, whatever that secondary emotion may be. But the secondary emotion is the reason that most of us react, respond, the reason that most of us retreat, and the reason that most of us withdraw. And so understanding that what you're feeling in that moment, when you're feeling frustration, that your frustration is a secondary emotion. So figure out what the root of your frustration is. Is the root of your frustration neglect? Is the root of your frustration insignificance? Is it misunderstanding? Is it disrespect? Whatever you may feel, that frustration is a secondary emotion. And so the fifth point that I have, it says, which is addressing the root, which is literally coming off the fourth one, is addressing the root. Most of the time we address the thing that frustrates us, but that's not the root of the situation. If the root isn't addressed, it would allow the situation to arise again. Sometimes this is why we feel that we are in a never-ending cycle with relationships, jobs, finances, spirituality, health, because the root of the issue is never solved. And so 4 and 5 kind of tie in together. And so 4 is saying that frustration is a secondary emotion. 5 is saying address the root of the secondary emotion. And so understanding that until you address the root of your secondary emotions, I'm not just talking about frustration, I'm talking about all of it. Every emotion, until you address the root of your frustration, then you will continue to stay in never-ending cycles. You will continue to stay in seasons of your life where you're wondering why you keep going through this, why you keep having to deal with this aggravation of frustration. Why do people keep doing whatever they're doing to you, and why do you keep responding? One thing that I do want to say is that God has given all of us responsibility. And so I want you to break the word down. Responsibility. And so how you respond, you have the ability to respond how you want to. What people do to you, that's their responsibility. How you respond or how you react, that's your responsibility. Yes, someone might make you mad. Yes, someone might make you frustrated. Yes, someone might say some things to you that you don't like. But God has given all of us responsibility because we all have free will. We all have a choice. And so understanding that it's your responsibility to react in a way that is edifying, that is constructive. It's not to react in a way that is going to be destructive and detrimental to your character, to your relationship with God, to how a person may see you, to whatever. You never know what and who you may impact by the way you react and respond. They have to, if they respond or if they do something to you that is hurtful and negative, I'm not saying that you let them walk over you. I'm saying you address it in a way that is still respectful. You address it in a way that is still uplifting. You address it in a way to let them know that that you will not settle for the way that they're treating you. You don't have to be all loud. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to be disrespectful. You don't have to curse someone out. And so understanding that you as the individual have responsibility. So your ability to respond to situations that are not favorable to you, that's your responsibility. And so understanding here and going to point number 6 is how to find the root of frustration, how to find the root of secondary emotions in certain situations. And it's understanding that sometimes the thing that you're frustrated about isn't the primary reason you're frustrated. The primary reason is something that could be hidden, like anger, fear, doubt, sadness, or shock, or other emotions. And so some points that I have here about how to find the root of your emotions and secondary emotions, and how frustration can be your friend, and how if you find the root of it is 1, self-awareness. Self-awareness is the conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. So understanding that having the proper perspective of reality or situations, understanding that having the proper reality and perspective of reality in certain situations will allow you to have the right responsibility and have the right response when it comes to certain things. And so making sure that you're not responding due to pain and trauma, due to a hidden thing that you have not uncovered in yourself. So that's one way that you can be, that's one point of self-awareness. The other one would be self-management. And self-management is taking responsibility for one's own behavior and well-being. And so understanding that you are not responsible for anyone else's habits. You're not responsible for anyone else's actions, motives, character. All you can do is control your actions, your habits, your motives, and your character. So understand how you manage yourself is what is important. How you manage yourself when you're frustrated, when you're angry, when you're fearful, when you're anxious, when your mind's all over the place, when you're overwhelmed. How you manage yourself in that moment is all you have control over. And so taking responsibility of your behaviors in that moment and taking responsibility of your well-being in that moment is how you can display self-management and get to the root of why these things are how they are and why you're frustrated. And so I'll end with this. And it's James 1:19, and this kind of wraps up everything. When it comes to being frustrated, when it comes to heated arguments, heated disagreements, when it comes to understanding, when it comes to all of that. And it's James 1:19. It says, "Beloved brothers and sisters, let everyone be quick to hear, a careful, thoughtful listener, slow to speak, a speaker of carefully chosen words, slow to anger, patient, reflective, forgiving." And then verse 20 goes in and says this, "For the deep-seated anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." And so that verse is literally letting us know that when we're going through situations and circumstances, let us be quick to hear. A careful, thoughtful listener. Let us actually listen to what's being said, because we can take things out of context. And so understanding, also be understanding that what we hear in the moment is going to be based on how we feel in the moment. And so also be a careful speaker. Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft and gentle answer turns away wrath. So understanding that what you say in the moment can either be constructive or destructive, can either be edifying or detrimental. So understanding that even though you're frustrated, that still gives you no right to just say anything you want out of your mouth. And trust me, from personal experience, I've dealt with this. Literally, God had to deal with me on this. And then from there, it says, be slow to anger. Because understanding that Ephesians 4:26 is be angry, but sin not. But understanding that anger will not produce anything constructive, will not produce anything that's edifying. And so understanding when you're angry, be patient, be reflective, and be more forgiving. And so understanding here in this verse, in verse 20, it says, for the deep-seated anger of man. That means the anger. That verse literally is telling us that the hidden anger of man, the deep-seated, that means it's embedded in us. That means sometimes it's so deep in us that we don't even understand it. Of man does not produce the righteousness of God. That word righteousness just means right standing with God. That means it's bigger than you. That means when you're angry, and you're going through situations that cause you frustration and cause you other emotions and how you respond to them, that it does not put you in right standing with God. And so I appreciate you guys for watching. I hope this helps someone, and I'll see you guys next time.